The house on Maple Street was too still that morning. The sound of a clock ticking in the living room echoed through the halls, blending with the faint hum of the refrigerator. Emily sat by the kitchen window, her cup of tea untouched, eyes staring at the drizzle outside. The garden looked tired, much like she felt. Her husband Mark had been gone for work again, another week. Another excuse. Emily had once believed that love could survive anything. Distance, stress, time. But lately, she wasn't sure anymore. Mark had changed. His calls were shorter, his laughter less frequent. He used to bring her flowers after every trip. Now he only brought silence. That morning, she wasn't alone. Upstairs, Daniel was unpacking his things. He was Mark's son from his first marriage, 22. Tall, quiet, with that same thoughtful look Mark once had in his youth. Daniel had just returned home from college for the summer. It had been months since Emily last saw him, and she was surprised by how much he had grown, not just taller, but more grounded, more aware of the world around him. She heard his footsteps and quickly straightened her back. When Daniel walked into the kitchen, his hair still damp from a shower, he gave her a polite smile. "Morning," he said, his voice calm and warm. "Good morning," Emily replied softly. "I made tea. Or coffee if you prefer." "Coffee's good," he said, sitting down across from her. As she poured it, she studied him briefly. His presence felt different now. Not as the awkward teenager she once tried to connect with, but as a young man. She reminded herself that he was just her stepson. Still, there was a strange comfort in having someone around again. Someone who filled the silence Mark had left behind. "So, how's school?" she asked, her tone light. "It's fine," he replied. "A lot of work. But I kind of like being busy." Emily smiled faintly. "That's good. Staying busy keeps the mind from wandering too much." Daniel nodded, but something in his eyes showed he understood what she meant. He looked at her, really looked, noticing how tired she seemed, how her smile carried a quiet sadness. She had always been kind to him, never trying to take his mother's place, but always making sure he felt welcome. They talked for a while, small things, harmless, polite. But beneath every exchange was a sense of shared loneliness. Two people trying to fill the emptiness that Mark's absence created. Later that day, Emily went to the backyard to water the plants. The air was warm and heavy after the rain, the soil still dark and soft. She wore an old white shirt and jeans, her hair tied back loosely. When Daniel came outside, she looked up, surprised. "I was going to fix the fence," he said, holding a toolbox. "Dad said it was falling apart." She smiled, grateful. "That would be wonderful. I've been meaning to do it, but I can't lift those panels alone." They worked side by side, and for the first time in weeks, the house felt alive. Daniel asked about the plants, and she told him how Mark had planted the roses years ago when they first bought the house. "He used to love gardening," she said quietly. "But now he barely steps outside." Daniel didn't say anything at first, then murmured, "Maybe he just forgot what makes him happy." Emily paused, looking at him. His words were simple, but hit deep. "Maybe," she said softly. They continued working, laughter occasionally breaking through the air. It felt easy, natural, something that had been missing for a long time. When the sun began to set, Emily brought out lemonade, and they sat on the porch. The golden light touched everything around them, the roses, the fence. Even her tired face seemed softer under it. "You know," Daniel said after a pause, "it's nice being home again. I didn't think it would feel this good." She smiled, her heart warming. "I'm glad you feel that way. I was worried you'd find it boring here." "Ta," he said. "It's peaceful." The way he said it made her glance at him. There was sincerity in his voice, something that made her chest tighten slightly. For a second, she forgot about the years, the distance, the titles. It was just two people enjoying a quiet sunset after a long day. That night, Emily cooked dinner. The sound of the knife on the cutting board filled the silence as Daniel helped her set the table. When they sat down, she noticed how comfortable it felt, how natural their conversation was. They spoke about college, movies, old family trips. Every laugh they shared seemed to erase a little bit of the distance between them. After dinner, As she was washing dishes, Daniel came to help again. "You don't have to," she said with a smile. "I know," he replied, "but it's better than just watching TV alone." That line lingered in her mind. Better than being alone. When everything was done, they sat again in the living room. The rain had started outside, tapping gently against the windows. The soft light of a lamp filled the space. Daniel leaned back on the couch, his voice quieter now. "Emily, can I ask you something?" "Of course," she said. "Are you okay?" The question caught her off guard. She tried to smile, but her eyes gave her away. "I'm fine," she said. "Just tired." He didn't push. He only said, "You don't seem fine." Something about his tone, gentle, sincere, made her throat tighten. It had been so long since someone asked her that and actually cared about the answer. She looked at him, trying to find words. "I think sometimes people get lost," she said finally. "They don't mean to. It just happens quietly." He nodded slowly. "I think I know what you mean." For a long moment, they just sat there listening to the rain. There was nothing inappropriate in the silence, just understanding. A quiet connection between two people who needed to feel seen. Later that night, after Daniel went to bed, Emily stood by the window in her room, staring at the rain. She thought about Mark, how distant he had become, how she had tried to reach him, but always ended up feeling smaller. And then she thought about Daniel, how easily he had listened. How simple it was to talk to him without feeling judged. It scared her a little, that comfort. But it also reminded her she was still human, capable of warmth, laughter, connection. Things she'd almost forgotten. The next morning, Daniel came down early. Emily was already awake, wearing her robe, hair loosely tied. She was making pancakes, something she hadn't done in months. "You're up early," he said, smiling. "Couldn't sleep," she replied. "Figured I'd make breakfast." They ate together, and as they did, she asked, "Would you help me clean the attic later? There's a lot of old stuff up there that needs sorting. Mark keeps saying he'll do it, but he never does." Daniel finished, smiling. She laughed. "Exactly," he agreed without hesitation. "Sure, let's do it." The rest of the day passed quietly, but both of them felt something unspoken waiting, not tension. Not anything wrong, just a strange sense that something important was coming. A moment that would change how they saw each other forever. When Emily looked at Daniel that afternoon, she didn't see the boy who used to visit on weekends. She saw someone who noticed her pain without her saying a word. Someone who made the house feel alive again. And when Daniel looked at her, he didn't see his father's wife. He saw a woman who had been strong for too long, who needed someone to simply understand her. Neither of them said it aloud. But both knew something had shifted. The attic would be where everything changed. The next morning began quietly. A soft light slipped through the curtains as Emily moved through the house with a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. She hadn't felt this awake in months. The idea of cleaning the attic wasn't what thrilled her. It was the thought of company, of sharing a small project with someone who actually wanted to be there. Daniel showed up at the kitchen doorway holding 2 mugs of coffee. "I made you one," he said. Emily smiled, genuinely surprised. "You made coffee for me?" "Yeah," he said with a shrug. "You made breakfast yesterday." "Fair trade." She took the mug, feeling a little warmth in her chest. It was a small thing, but small things meant a lot these days. They finished their drinks quickly and headed upstairs. The attic door creaked open after years of being ignored. Dust floated in the sunlight that streamed through the single small window. The air smelled like old wood and forgotten memories. Cardboard boxes lined the walls, filled with everything from photo albums to winter coats. "Wow," Daniel said, looking around. "This is like stepping into another time." Emily laughed softly. "That's because no one's been brave enough to come up here since we moved in." He looked back at her. "Well, today's the day." They started sorting through boxes, working in silence at first. Emily found a box full of Mark's old things, travel souvenirs, pictures from business trips, gifts he'd brought her years ago. Her hands lingered on a small framed photo of them on their honeymoon. She smiled faintly, then set it aside. Daniel noticed the quiet change in her face. "You okay?" She nodded, just remembering. He didn't ask more, but his silence was gentle. He kept organizing things, giving her space to feel what she needed to feel. After a while, Emily found an old stereo and plugged it in. To her surprise, it still worked. A soft song from the early 2000s filled the attic, slow, melodic, nostalgic. She looked at Daniel with a playful grin. Guess this place needed some music. He smiled back. You know what? It's not bad up here now. They worked for hours, talking and laughing. Emily told him stories from when she and Mark had first met, how nervous she had been, how full of dreams they both were. Daniel listened carefully, sometimes smiling, sometimes looking thoughtful. You must have loved him a lot, he said quietly. I did, she replied, and I still do in a way. But love changes. Sometimes it fades quietly, not because you want it to, but because both people stop trying. Daniel was silent for a moment. I think I get that. There was something honest in his voice that caught her attention. She glanced at him. Have you ever loved someone like that? He hesitated. Almost, but I think it was just timing. Some people come into your life when you're not ready for them. Emily nodded. And sometimes they leave when you need them the most. For a few seconds, their eyes met. Not romantically, not inappropriately, but deeply human. It was the look of two people who had both been let down by time and circumstance. Then Emily looked away, taking a breath. Let's keep going, she said softly. They found an old box full of family photos. Daniel as a little boy, Mark's first wife smiling beside him. Emily held up one of the pictures. You were adorable, she said. Daniel laughed. Yeah, before I discovered fast food and bad haircuts. She chuckled, shaking her head. You still have that same look, though. Kind eyes. He smiled, a little embarrassed. Thanks. Hours passed, and by late afternoon, the attic looked almost new. The air felt lighter. Emily wiped the dust off her hands, looking around. We actually did it. Daniel grinned. Teamwork. She nodded. You have no idea how much this means to me, Daniel. I've been trying to do this for years, but I could never bring myself to. Why not? He asked. She hesitated. Because everything here reminded me of what I lost, of how quiet the house became. Daniel stepped closer. Not too close, but enough for his voice to sound sincere. Maybe it's not too late to bring some of that life back. Emily looked at him, her throat tight. You sound like someone twice your age. He laughed softly. Maybe college makes you think too much. She smiled, then turned toward the window. The rain had stopped and sunlight streamed through, painting the room in gold. You know, she said, I've been thinking of repainting this attic, turning it into something useful. Maybe a reading space or an art room. Daniel nodded. That's a great idea. You should do it. She looked at him for a moment, then said quietly, Then promise me something. What's that? Promise you'll help me finish it before you go back to school. Daniel's eyes softened. I promise. Something about that promise felt heavier than it should have. Not romantic, but meaningful. Like two people quietly rebuilding something together that the world had forgotten. They packed the last few boxes and went downstairs. Emily made them sandwiches, and they sat at the kitchen table, exhausted but happy. The kind of happiness that came from simple things. Teamwork, laughter, feeling seen, double quotes Emily. Daniel said after a while, You're different than I remember. She tilted her head. Different how? You seem lighter, like you're finally breathing again. She smiled faintly. Maybe I am. Maybe cleaning that attic was exactly what I needed. There was a comfortable pause before she added, Thank you for being here, Daniel. Really. This house feels less empty when you're around. He smiled. I'm glad. I like being here. That night, when she was alone in her room, Emily thought about that day, the laughter, the easy way they talked, the promise they made. It wasn't wrong. It wasn't about attraction. It was about two lonely people finding hope again in a house that had forgotten joy. She walked to her dresser and found an old photo of Mark. She looked at it for a long time. "I wish you'd come home," she whispered. "You're missing everything." The next morning, the sky was clear. Daniel found her in the backyard, kneeling by the flower bed. "You're at it again," he said with a smile. "I'm making up for lost time," she replied, brushing her hands on her jeans. "These poor flowers have been ignored long enough." He crouched down beside her. "Need help?" She smiled. "I'd like that." As they worked, she found herself laughing again, not the forced kind she used around Mark, but a real, full laugh. It surprised her. When they finished, she looked around proudly. "Not bad for a morning's work." Daniel nodded. "You should show Dad. He'd be impressed." Her smile faded slightly. "Maybe, but I'm not sure he'd notice anymore." Daniel looked at her, his voice gentle. "Then I'll notice for him." The words made her heart ache, not because they were wrong, but because they were kind. Two kind dots she stood, brushing off her jeans. "Come on," she said softly. "Let's paint that attic before the day's gone." And they did. The laughter continued, the paint spilled, the air smelled of fresh color and new beginnings. The walls went from gray to light cream, and the attic slowly turned into something beautiful. When they were done, Emily stood back, her eyes shining. "It's perfect." Daniel smiled, wiping his hands. "We make a good team." For a long moment, they both stood there, looking around the room, a space that had once been forgotten but now glowed with light. Emily turned to him and said quietly, "You helped me remember something I thought I'd lost." "What's that?" He asked how to feel alive again. Daniel didn't know what to say. He just smiled softly, and for a moment neither of them spoke. The sunlight, the scent of paint, the quiet heartbeat of the house, it all seemed to hold its breath. Outside, the world moved on. But inside that attic, something had changed. Something gentle. Something good. Summer drifted quietly into its final days. The attic, once dark and forgotten, looked alive. Sunlight poured in through the window, falling across the cream-colored walls and the shelves Daniel had built with his own hands. Emily stood there one morning, holding a small mug of coffee, taking in the calmness. It was the first time in years that her house felt like home again. Downstairs, Daniel was packing a few boxes. His summer break was ending. College awaited. The thought made Emily's heart tighten. She had grown used to his presence, his calm energy, his kindness. The easy laughter that filled rooms once ruled by silence. She found him in the living room, folding a few clothes. "You're leaving tomorrow?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Yeah, early morning. I've got to move into my apartment before classes start." She tried to smile, but her voice came out soft. "It's going to feel strange here without you." He looked up. "It's going to feel strange for me too. I've gotten used to this place. Used to being here." The air between them felt heavier than before. Not wrong, just full of emotions neither of them knew how to name. "Before you go," Emily said, "I want to show you something." She led him up to the attic. It smelled faintly of fresh paint and coffee. On the far side of the room stood a small wooden box. She opened it and took out a framed picture, one of the two of them, laughing during the painting day, both covered in white paint. Daniel smiled as soon as he saw it. "You kept that?" he asked. "Of course," she said. "That day meant something to me. It reminded me that not everything in this house had to be tied to sadness." He looked at her for a moment, then said quietly, "You're stronger than you think, Emily." She let out a small laugh. "I don't feel that way most days." "Still," he said, "you are." There was silence again, comfortable, but filled with all the things they would never say. Later that afternoon, Mark called. His voice on the other end of the phone was distant, distracted. Emily listened to him talk about meetings and flights and deadlines. But all she could think about was how far away he sounded, even though the phone line was clear. "When will you be home?" she asked. "Maybe next weekend," he replied quickly. "Things are busy right now." She wanted to tell him she missed him, that their house didn't feel like a home without him, but she didn't. She just said, "Okay," and hung up. That Daniel walked in just as she ended the call. He could see the disappointment in her face, but he didn't ask. Instead, he said softly, "Want to take a walk?" She hesitated, then nodded. They walked through the neighborhood park. The air was warm, the trees glowing gold under the late afternoon sun. Families laughed in the distance, children ran by, and for a while, Emily felt lighter. As they sat on a bench near the pond, Daniel broke the silence. "Do you ever think about starting over?" She looked at him, puzzled. "Starting over?" "Yeah, like moving somewhere new. Doing something that's just yours." Emily sighed. "Sometimes. But it's hard. This house, this life, it all feels like a story I didn't finish. I keep waiting for the next chapter. But Mark? He's living another one." Daniel nodded slowly. "You deserve more than waiting." The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. She turned to him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "You remind me of what I used to believe in," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "What's that?" "That kindness can change things." They walked home quietly after that, both lost in thought. The day ended with dinner, simple, warm, peaceful. Emily tried to memorize it. The sound of Daniel's laughter, the way he thanked her for the meal. The calm rhythm of a house that finally felt alive again. When night came, Emily couldn't sleep. She went up to the attic one last time. The moonlight spilled through the window, painting the floor in silver. She sat down on the couch they had moved up there and thought about everything that had happened that summer. The garden. The laughter. The quiet moments that had made her feel seen again. She realized something. It wasn't just Daniel's presence that had changed her. It was the reminder that she was still capable of connection, of joy, of rebuilding what life had broken. The next morning, Daniel's car was already loaded when she came outside. He turned when he saw her, smiling softly. "You didn't think you'd sneak out without saying goodbye, did you?" she said with a faint laugh. "Never," he replied. She handed him a small envelope. "Don't open it until you get to campus." He looked at it curiously, but nodded. "Deal." Then she took a deep breath and said, "Daniel, thank you for everything. You've done more for this house and for me than you realize." He shook his head. "You helped me too, Emily. You reminded me what family feels like. Not perfect, not easy, just real." For a long moment, they stood there in silence. Then, with a quiet smile, Daniel hugged her. It wasn't a long hug, but it said everything words couldn't. When he pulled away, she could see that his eyes were a little wet, hers too, as his car drove away. Emily stood in the driveway, watching until the sound of the engine disappeared. The house behind her was quiet again, but it was a different kind of quiet this time. Not empty, not lonely, just peaceful. Inside, she went to the attic. The framed picture of her and Daniel sat on the shelf, next to the old photo of her and Mark. For the first time, she didn't feel torn between them. Both moments, past and present, were parts of her story. She sat down at the small desk Daniel had built for her and opened her journal. Then she began to write. August 25th. The summer changed me. Not because of something big, but because of someone who reminded me that small kindness can heal what time tried to break. For so long, I blamed Mark's distance for my unhappiness. But maybe I forgot to notice the parts of life still reaching out to me. I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. I want to start again. For me, days turned into weeks. Emily started repainting other rooms in the house, tending to the garden more, reconnecting with friends she hadn't seen in years. Mark finally came home one weekend, tired and distracted. He noticed the changes immediately. The house looked brighter, the garden alive again, and Emily seemed calmer. "You've been busy," he said. She smiled. "Just taking care of what matters." He looked at her for a long moment. Something in her confidence made him pause. "I missed this," he said quietly. Emily didn't respond right away. She simply nodded. "Then maybe we can start over. Slowly." Wasn't a promise, but it was something a beginning. Fragile, but real. That evening, when she was alone again, she sat by the attic window and looked out at the sunset. Her phone buzzed. A message from Daniel. "Got to campus safely. Opened your letter. Thank you for everything, Emily. I'll keep my promise. Don't stop painting that attic. You made it beautiful." She smiled, her heart full. In her letter, she had written something simple. "You help me remember that life doesn't end when love changes, it just finds new forms." Emily looked around the attic, the soft colors, the books on the shelf, the framed photo of laughter. It wasn't just a room anymore. It was proof that healing was possible. Outside, the wind moved gently through the trees. Inside, Emily whispered to herself, "This isn't the end. It's just the start of a better chapter." And somewhere far away, Daniel probably thought the same. It had been 6 months since Margaret's husband, Robert, packed his suitcase and left. The sound of the car pulling out of their driveway in rural Vermont still echoed in her mind some nights. After 30 years together, he said he needed space. What he really needed, she soon learned, was a new start with a younger woman from his office. Margaret was 58, still graceful, kind, and deeply loyal. She wasn't the type to lash out or beg. She just stood by the kitchen window that morning, watching snow fall over the porch steps, and whispered to herself, "You'll be fine. You always are." But being fine and feeling fine were two different things. The house was quiet. Too quiet. Even the grandfather clock seemed to tick louder in the empty rooms. She filled her days with gardening, volunteering, and trying not to think about how empty the bed felt at night. Then, one Thursday afternoon, the phone rang. It was Lily, Robert's daughter from his first marriage. "Margaret," she said gently, "I know things have been difficult, but my son Evan's looking for work before he starts graduate school. Maybe he could help you around the house. He's handy with repairs." Margaret hesitated. She remembered Evan as a boy running around their backyard summers ago, chasing fireflies. "He's 24 now," Lily said as if reading her thoughts. "Mature, thoughtful. It might be good for both of you." After a long pause, Margaret agreed. "All right. Tell him to come next week." When Evan arrived, the air outside was still heavy with the scent of spring rain. He stepped out of his old pickup truck carrying a box of tools and a hesitant smile. "Hi, Margaret," he said. His voice had deepened since she'd last seen him. She opened the screen door, smiling back. "Goodness, you've grown up. Come in." He walked into the house and looked around. "Still smells like cinnamon and lemon cleaner," he said. "Exactly like I remember." Margaret chuckled. Some habits don't change. Over coffee at the kitchen table, they caught up. He told her about his college years, how he'd studied architecture but wasn't sure it was the right path. "I need some time to think," he said. "Mom thought helping you might clear my head." Margaret nodded. "Well, I can always use help around here. The porch railing's loose and the roof over the shed leaks." He grinned. "I'll start tomorrow morning." The next few days fell into a rhythm. Margaret woke early to make breakfast pancakes or oatmeal, and Devin would appear, hair still damp from a shower, ready to work. He was polite, easy to talk to, and quietly funny. While he worked, Margaret often sat nearby reading or weeding the garden. Sometimes they'd share small conversations about books, about the weather, about how life can surprise you. Evan had a way of asking questions that made her think. One afternoon while fixing the fence, he asked, "Do you ever miss him?" Margaret looked up from her pruning shears. "Every day. But not the man he became, the one who left. I miss the one who stayed for years before that." Evan nodded. "I get that." He didn't pry further, and she appreciated that. That evening, it rained again. The roof creaked softly as thunder rolled in the distance. The power flickered once, then went out. Margaret lit a candle and found Evan sitting in the living room, tuning an old radio. "Looks like we're going old-fashioned tonight," he said, smiling. She laughed. "At least we have candles. I'll make tea." They sat on the couch sipping tea, the candlelight throwing warm shadows across the walls. Evan told stories from his road trips with friends, how they'd gotten lost in Colorado, how they'd slept under open skies in Arizona. Margaret listened, smiling. "You've seen more of the world at 24 than I did at 40, he shrugged. "You've built more than I ever have. This house, your garden, it's something." Her heart softened. For months, she'd felt invisible, like everything she built no longer mattered. But here was someone who noticed. when the power returned. The clock blinked 11:17 p.m. Margaret stood up. "We should both get some sleep. You've got a full day tomorrow." Evan nodded. "Good night, Margaret." As she walked upstairs, she felt something unfamiliar lightness. She realized it wasn't attraction, but warmth. Human warmth she hadn't felt in months. The next morning, sunlight poured through the curtains. Margaret was already in the kitchen when Evan came down. "Morning," he said, pouring himself coffee. She smiled. "Morning. You're up early." He shrugged. "Couldn't sleep. I was thinking about how to fix the shed door off its hinges." "I trust your judgment," she said. Later that day, he climbed the ladder to replace loose shingles. Margaret stood below, holding the base steady. The air was bright and full of birdsong. "You really didn't have to help, he called down. "I'm not standing here for you," she said playfully. "I'm protecting my rose bushes." He laughed, the sound echoing across the yard. For a moment, Margaret realized how much joy that sound brought her. That evening, when the work was done, they sat on the porch steps with lemonade. Evan talked about his plans. "Maybe I'll move to Chicago for grad school. Or maybe I'll stay close for a while. Mom worries if I go too far." Margaret nodded thoughtfully. Distance can teach you things you don't learn at home. But sometimes home teaches you things you can't learn anywhere else. He looked at her curiously. "You sound like someone who knows that firsthand." "I do," she said softly. Their eyes met briefly, not romantically, but with shared understanding to people from different generations, who knew the ache of change and the comfort of being seen. Days turned into weeks. The garden bloomed, the roof no longer leaked, and laughter slowly returned to the old house. Margaret found herself baking again muffins, pies, the kind of small joys she'd stopped allowing herself. One afternoon, she baked apple pie and left a slice for Evan on the counter with a note, "For all your hard work." When he came in from mowing the lawn, he smiled at the sight. "You didn't have to," he said, holding the note. "I wanted to," she replied. That night, Evan went to bed early, but Margaret stayed downstairs cleaning up. When she walked past the living room, she noticed the old photo album open on the coffee table, pictures of Robert, young and smiling beside her. Evan had probably been looking through it. She closed the cover gently, then sat down. The past felt far away now, but not bitterly so, just distant. Like a story told long ago. For the first time since Robert left, she didn't feel abandoned. She felt present. A week later, Lily called to check in. "How's Evan doing over there?" she asked. Margaret smiled. "He's been wonderful. Fixed everything. Even got the garden lights working." Lily laughed. "That sounds like him. He said you make the best coffee he's ever had." Margaret blushed slightly. "He's just being kind." When she hung up, she found Evan in the garden, kneeling near the roses. "You've done wonders here," she said. He looked up, smiling. "It's your care that keeps them alive." Something in his tone made her pause, not romantic, not misplaced, just full of respect and gratitude. And in that moment, Margaret realized how healing simple companionship could be. That evening, a thunderstorm rolled in. The lights flickered again, and she found Evan by the window, watching the lightning. "It's funny," he said. "When I was a kid, storms used to scare me. Now, I kind of like them. They remind you that chaos can still be beautiful," she said. He nodded. "Yeah, exactly that." They stood there a moment, listening to the rain. The silence between them wasn't heavy anymore, was peaceful. Margaret turned to go upstairs. "Good night, Evan. Good night," he replied softly as she climbed the stairs. She caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Yes, but not defeated. Behind her, the storm rumbled like distant applause. For the first time in a long while, she smiled at herself. Something inside her had shifted, not because of Evan's presence, but because she'd finally allowed life to move again. Summer had begun to soften the edges of Vermont's long spring rains. The house looked alive again, flowers curling toward sunlight, curtains open, the scent of coffee drifting through every morning. Margaret found herself humming sometimes as she watered the plants or dusted the old piano. Evan stayed busy repairing the last of the porch steps. He worked with quiet focus, rarely wasting words, and Margaret appreciated that. They didn't need constant talk. They had a calm rhythm. He worked. She cooked. They shared short meals and longer silences that didn't feel lonely anymore. But one Saturday morning, a small tension crept in. Evan was at the sink, rinsing tools, when he asked, "Do you think you'll ever talk to Robert again?" The question startled her. She turned from the window. "No, there's nothing left to say." He nodded slowly. "Sometimes people change too late, I guess." Margaret wiped her hands on a towel. "Or sometimes they change because they never really wanted to stay." He didn't reply, just nodded, but his expression lingered in her mind long after he went outside. She realized she'd been speaking like someone who'd accepted loss, not fought it. That night, lying awake, she wondered when acceptance had turned into quiet surrender. The next week, Evan got a call from a university in Chicago. "They want me for an interview," he told her, excitement in his voice. "It's not a full acceptance yet, but it's close." Margaret smiled. "That's wonderful, Evan." He grinned. "Yeah, it feels good. But I'll miss this place, honestly." She didn't expect to feel a pinch of sadness at his words. "You'll do great," she said softly. "And the house will always be here if you ever visit." Over the next few days, she noticed herself watching him more closely, nod, out of longing, but gratitude. He had brought life back to the rooms Robert had emptied. The kitchen laughter. The small conversations they had reminded her what simple companionship could do. The morning before his trip, they went to the farmer's market together. The town was buzzing with locals, vendors calling out prices, the air rich with baked bread and strawberries. Evan pointed out a stand of handmade wind chimes. "That one sounds like rain," he said, gently tapping one of the bells. Margaret smiled. "You have an ear for things most people ignore." He shrugged. "I think you taught me that. Do you notice small things too?" She looked at him, realizing it was true. She had started seeing beauty again in chipped teacups, in morning sunlight, in second chances. When they returned home, Evan packed his small suitcase. "It's just a week," he said. "I'll be back before you know it." Margaret nodded, helping him zip the bag. "Don't worry about the house. I'll manage." He laughed. "I'm more worried about the rose bushes." When his truck pulled away, the road stretched quiet again, the sound of gravel fading into the distance. Margaret stood on the porch long after he was gone, listening to the silence. That night, she set 2 plates at the dinner table before realizing she only needed one. She smiled sadly, put one back, and whispered, "Old habits." Days passed slowly. Without Evan, the house felt larger. She spent evenings reading on the porch, waiting for updates. Sometimes her phone buzzed with a message. "Interview went well," or "Chicago's beautiful but loud." Each text made her heart lighter. But then the messages stopped for 2 days. Margaret tried not to worry, but the quiet pressed on her chest. Finally, one evening, her phone lit up. "Got in. They accepted me. I'll tell you everything when I'm back." Margaret smiled through tears. She typed, "I'm proud of you, Evan." He replied, "Wouldn't have done it without your coffee and advice." She laughed softly to herself. It was strange how simple words could fill an empty house. Evan returned that weekend, the air buzzing with summer heat. Margaret met him at the door with lemonade. "So," she asked. "I'm moving to Chicago in 3 weeks," he said. His voice carried both excitement and hesitation. "That's wonderful," she said, forcing a bright smile. "Truly." He looked around the kitchen. "It's going to feel strange leaving this place." "You'll build something new there," she said gently. "It's what life is, for a building." He studied her face as if memorizing it. "You say that like someone who's done it a few times?" She laughed softly. "Maybe once or twice." The room grew quiet, filled with the sound of cicadas outside. Margaret changed the subject. "You should tell your mom the news. She'll be thrilled." Evan nodded but didn't move right away. "Yeah, I will." That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, watching moonlight spill across the garden. She thought about her life before all this, the years with Robert, the predictable dinners, the quiet nights. She had spent decades building security, but not much joy. Evan's arrival had reminded her what laughter felt like, what curiosity sounded like. But he was young, with a life waiting beyond these hills. She didn't want to be another weight holding him down. The next morning, she went out early to prune the roses. When Evan came outside, coffee in hand, he said, "You're up early." "Couldn't sleep," she said, smiling. "Too much energy." He chuckled. "That's rare for you." They worked quietly, side by side. Margaret wanted to tell him how proud she was, how much he had helped her heal, but the words stayed lodged in her throat. A few days later, Lily visited. "He told me about the move," she said. "You must be proud." Margaret nodded. "I am." Lily looked around. He really did wonders here. "The place feels lighter." "Yes," Margaret said softly. "He brought back something I'd lost." Lily smiled kindly. "He has that effect on people. He sees the good in everything." When Lily left, Margaret stood in the doorway for a long moment. The truth was simple. Levin had reminded her how to live again. That was all. No confusion, no boundary crossed, just human healing in its quietest form. 2 weeks before Evan's move, the weather turned hot. They decided to fix the old attic fan together. The attic was dusty, filled with boxes and echoes of forgotten years. Evan sneezed. "I think this place has more history than some museums." Margaret laughed. "Be careful up there." While he worked, she opened an old trunk filled with photographs, weddings, birthdays, a young Robert smiling proudly beside her. She felt a pang, but not bitterness, just gratitude for what had once been. Evan climbed down the ladder. "It's fixed." He noticed the photos in her hand. "You look happy there?" "I was," she said. "Different time." He hesitated. "You still look happy sometimes, like when you talk about the garden." She smiled faintly. "That's because plants don't leave." He frowned slightly, unsure if she was joking. But she smiled to show she was fine. Later that evening, they sat outside as the sky turned orange. "When do you leave?" she asked quietly. "Next Friday, so soon." He nodded. "I'll miss this place. It feels more like home than home does." "Then take a little of it with you," she said, handing him a small potted rose cutting. "From my garden to yours." He looked touched. "Thank you, Margaret, for everything." She smiled softly. "Don't thank me. You brought the sunlight back here." They sat in silence for a while, the air full of crickets and unspoken words. The week passed faster than she wanted. On his last day, the house was spotless, every project finished. Evan packed his tools into the truck. Margaret brought him a thermos of coffee and a paper bag with muffins. "For the road," she said. He grinned. "You know, you might have spoiled me for city life." "I doubt that," she said warmly. "You'll do fine." He hesitated, then said quietly, "You know, when I came here, I thought I was just helping fix things. But you fixed something in me, too." Margaret blinked back sudden tears. "I think we both did that for each other." He nodded slowly, as if the truth of that settled somewhere deep. When he finally drove away, she stood on the porch, waving until the truck disappeared. The silence that followed felt different, this time peaceful, not lonely. That night she walked through the house. It was still, but not empty. Everywhere she looked, fresh paint on the porch, repaired shelves. The small rose cutting missing from the window there were signs of change. She poured herself tea and sat by the window, whispering, "Thank you, Evan." Not for staying, but for reminding her that life still moved, still grew, even after heartbreak. Outside, their garden lights glowed softly in the dark. She smiled, feeling content for the first time in years. Some connections weren't meant to last forever. They existed to awaken something long asleep. Autumn returned to Vermont with its familiar crisp air and red leaves painting the hills. It had been 6 months since Evan left for Chicago. The house was quiet again, but not empty. Margaret had filled her days with gardening, book clubs, and early morning walks. She smiled more easily now. Sometimes, when the wind rattled the windows, she would glance toward the porch, half expecting to see him fixing something, his sleeves rolled up, his quiet concentration steadying the whole world. But he was gone, living his own life, and that was how it was meant to be. One late afternoon, as Margaret sorted mail at the kitchen counter, she noticed an envelope with unfamiliar handwriting. Chicago postmark. Her heart gave a small, surprised beat. She opened it carefully. Dear Margaret, I hope the garden's still winning its fight against the frost. The city's busier than I imagined, but I'm doing well. I started working part-time at a museum and studying architecture. You were right. Sometimes rebuilding begins when you least expect it. I wanted you to know that your words, your patience, and your stories still guide me here. I'm grateful. Margaret sat down slowly. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed those words. She smiled, folded the letter neatly, and placed it in her old music box, the same one that once held her wedding ring. That night, she stepped outside and looked at the stars. The wind was sharp, but peaceful. She whispered softly, "He's doing fine." Weeks passed and more letters came. Not often, just enough to fill the quiet. Evan wrote about classes, his small apartment, the people he met. He described the city lights and how they reminded him of the porch lantern they used to fix together. Margaret replied every few weeks, writing about her garden, the neighbors, and how the house had become her friend again. It wasn't romance. It was connection, pure and human. They both knew that some relationships were not meant to last forever, but still shaped everything that came after. One snowy morning, she received another letter, but this one was different. Margaret, I met someone. Her name is Claire. She's kind and she listens the way you do. I wanted you to know because I think you'd like her. I hope that's okay. Margaret read the words twice. A soft ache moved through her chest, but it wasn't sadness. It was peace. She smiled, closed the letter, and whispered, "Good for you, Evan." Okay. She went outside to brush snow off the porch railings, her breath misting in the cold. She looked up at the sky and felt something deep, pride, warmth, and gratitude that she had been part of someone's healing journey. That spring, Lily visited again. "You look happy, Mom," she said, stirring sugar into her tea. "I am," Margaret replied. Peaceful, finally. Lily glanced around the cozy kitchen. "You've done a lot with this place. Can't help me remember who I was," Margaret said with a smile. "For a long time, I thought life stopped when your heart breaks. But sometimes, it just starts breathing differently." Lily nodded thoughtfully. "You sound like someone who's made peace with the past." "I think I have," Margaret said. Later, after Lily left, Margaret walked to the garden and knelt by the rose bushes Evan had helped her plant. New buds had begun to bloom. She touched one gently, thinking, everything grows if you just give it time. Months rolled into a year. Evan's letters came less frequently, but that was natural. He was living fully now, chasing dreams and new beginnings. Margaret never felt abandoned. She felt fulfilled. On his birthday, she sent a simple postcard, "Keep growing. Evan, the world needs builders, not just of walls, but of hearts." 2 years later, she received a small parcel in the mail. Inside was a framed photograph, Evan standing beside a young woman with bright eyes and a calm smile. Behind them was a building site, scaffolding rising high. "We're engaged," the note read. "I wanted you to be the first to know. Thank you for believing in me when I see OULDN single quotes." Margaret held the photo for a long moment, her fingers trembling slightly. Tears gathered, but they were the kind that came with warmth, not sorrow. "He's found his future," she whispered, that night. She placed the photograph on the shelf beside her family pictures, not out of longing, but pride. The following summer, Margaret received another letter, this time an invitation. "Claire and I are getting married in August. It would mean a lot if you came." She hesitated at first. Chicago was far and her health wasn't what it used to be. But something inside urged her to go. She hadn't traveled in years. But this felt important. So one early morning, She packed a small suitcase, put on her best blue dress, and boarded a train bound west as the train rolled through fields and small towns. She gazed out the window, memories flooding back, laughter on the porch, the sound of rain, conversations that healed old wounds. By the time she reached Chicago, she felt ready for whatever waited. The wedding was simple and beautiful, held in a small garden surrounded by white roses. When Evan saw her among the guests, his face lit up. "Margaret," he said, rushing over to hug her. "You didn't think I'd miss it, did you?" She laughed. He grinned. "You came all this way. I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Claire, the bride, joined them with a warm smile. "You must be Margaret. Evans told me so much about you." Margaret smiled, her eyes kind. "I've heard beautiful things about you, too." As the ceremony began, Margaret sat quietly, watching as vows were exchanged under the golden light. She thought about all the chapters of her life, the love she'd lost, the pain she'd survived, and the peace she'd finally earned. When the couple kissed, she clapped softly, whispering, "He's home." After the reception, Evan found her sitting by a small fountain. "I don't know how to thank you," he said. "You already did," she replied. "By living fully," he smiled, eyes shining. "I wouldn't be here without you." Margaret shook her head. "You would have found your way. I just gave you a little light when it got dark." He hesitated, then said, "I still keep the rose cutting. It's growing." She smiled. "Of course it is." Before leaving, Evan hugged her tightly. "You'll always have a place in my story," he said, "and you in mine." She replied softly. That evening, Margaret walked back to her hotel room alone. The city lights shimmered like stars brought to earth. She sat by the window, feeling both full and light. Life had come full circle. She had given love again, not the kind that binds, but the kind that frees. When she returned home to Vermont, she went straight to her garden. The roses were in bloom again, bright and full of life. She smiled, feeling the wind brush against her face. Whispering something like gratitude, Margaret picked one rose, placed it in a small vase, and set it by the window beside Evan's wedding photo. She looked out at the sunset and whispered, "We all find our way, don't we?" Her heart, once heavy with memories, now felt open. It's peaceful. For the first time in years, she felt that every ending truly did hold a quiet beginning.